Warm welcome to our event on Russia's internet and technology policy in war times. My name is Stefan Meister. I'm head of the program for international order and democracy at the German Council on Foreign Relations in Berlin. I'm happy to head and to moderate this discussion. Russia's internet and technology policy is an important topic. And until now, I think not sufficiently researched, and only a few experts who are really dealing with this topic systematically. And we can also say it's a sensible topic, in Russia, and it's becoming even more sensible with these times in which we are living now. I'm happy that my colleague Alena Epifanova has worked on the topic for the last years systematically. And I think we all understand that now with the Russian war in Ukraine, this topic becomes even more important than it was already before. With more internet censorship by the Russian government and technological sanctions against Russia by the West, I think we are in a new stage in the control of the internet in Russia and the cut off of Russia from Western technology, which will have a major impact also on the whole sector, you can say. That means there are two sides of the sovereign internet. On one hand, the control of the internet by the Russian state and social media also by the Russian state. And on the other hand, if Russia is able to develop its own technology independently from Western or external suppliers. I think here China comes in. I think that's also something we should discuss today. If Russia will not buy or get any more Western technology, it will be more dependent, I think, first of all, on Chinese technology. And it's also a question how this will work and what does this mean. I think further issues with the war are the IT sector was a growing economy in Russia. I think it was one of the most innovative sectors also in the Russian economy. And what does the huge brain drain with the war mean also for the future of the sector in Russia and the growing control also by the state of this sector? I think that all has consequences also for the innovation capabilities of this sector. So I think the main idea here is to present a study Alena and Philipp have done before the war on Russia's quest for digital sovereignty. I think this is a result of a monthly or really quite long research, this publication, and it was kindly supported by the policy planning at the German Federal Foreign Office. And we would really thank also the German Foreign Office for their kind support in the preparation and in publishing also this study. Today, we would like to present key findings of the study and discuss current developments around RUNET in times of war. So I think there are some trends we already observed and were researched before the war. I think they are even more accelerated, and this trend is getting more strong, with the war. We have, I think, excellent speakers here. Introduction will be done by the authors of this study, which is Alena Epifanova, who's research fellow at the International Order and Democracy Program of DGAP, and Philipp Dietrich, who was project assistant also at DGAP. I'm also very much delighted to welcome two excellent experts, which is first Nikita Istomin, who is a digital rights lawyer at Roskomsvoboda, which is the Russian non-governmental organization working on digital rights protection and digital empowerment. And we have Natalia Krapiva, who is a tech legal counsel at Access Now. She's also a lawyer and worked before in different positions in the human rights sector. We will have short inputs, also short discussion, and then really open also for questions and for the discussion afterwards. So it will be not too long presentations. So let's start with Alena and Philipp with the questions. So what is digital sovereignty in Russian terms? How would you define it? And what are the main goals, and to what extent has Russia achieved this digital sovereignty? Maybe Alena, you will start.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stefan, for this introduction. Indeed, so we wanted to understand what actually Russia means under digital sovereignty. It's a contested term everywhere in the world and also in the European Union. And we found out that Russia's understanding has two main components of the digital sovereignty. So from one side, the country wants to achieve independence in IT and global competitiveness, to be able to produce own digital technologies and be globally competitive, to find new markets for its digital products. So Stefan already mentioned that actually IT sector has been or used to be one of the most promising areas of the Russia's economy. So that's why this ambitious is understandable. On another side, Russian state wanted to gain content security by state control over the internet and what we know as sovereign internet. So that this is one very important component of this understanding. And another component is actually technological sovereignty, so to be independent from other countries in producing information and communication technologies and deploy them for its own need and also for an economic growth. We also found out that these two components are actually competing. And if we look back and see initiatives, digital strategies or strategies for information control implemented in the last decade, we see that actually sovereign internet component was prioritized since 2012. So after the mass demonstrations in Russian cities after the Duma elections, we see quite a clear shift for more state control of the information and over the internet infrastructure in Russia. We also see some initiatives or some programs to develop the IT industry and the IT sector in Russia. But at the same time, if we see how dependent Russia from Western technology is, and to what extent Russia achieved its own goals in research and development sector, innovation indexes, and also on export of its own digital products, we see that Russia hasn't achieved that much. To frame it very friendly. At the same time, if we look at the sovereign internet, if we look at the legislation, tools, mechanism, systems to control information, to control social media platforms in Russia, we see significant results in that. So Philipp will tell more about these parts, so about the content security, about Russia's achievement in its sovereign internet. I will just briefly introduce our key findings when it comes to technological sovereignty. So it was surprisingly, I mean, we have heard about Russia's huge dependence on Western technologies, but when we looked at some key areas of the technological sector of Russia, so like, for example, producing of its own hard and software, and especially microchip production, 5G solutions, operating system, and cloud computing, we discovered like significant dependence on Western technologies in many areas of Russia's economy, of the Russian states, of the Russia's industry. And and so then it was clear that there is a clear mismatch between Russia's ambition to gain this component of the digital sovereignty, to be technologically independent, to be able to produce IT for its own needs, and also be a technological leader. So, and it was clear what already back then, so before the war, which started on the 24th of February, it was clear that Russia has significant obstacles to reach technological independence and also to reach technological power to be able to compete with such global leaders as United States or China. This challenge looked almost impossible to achieve in the short and medium term. And we see that Russia's digital and innovation policy in the last years was not sufficient to overcome this backlog and also to achieve genuine technology sovereignty. So we particularly look at the Russian processors, so the Russia's hardware sector. So we were not able to cover all the fields, but we tried to cover the main ones. And here we saw that there are quite successful manufacturer of processors, which is Baikal Electronics and the Moscow Center of SPRC technologies. So they also are presented in Russia as companies which are able to substitute Russia's dependency on hardware and especially on processors. But when we look at the details, we also discovered that both companies are dependent on the Taiwanese company TSMC, which make production of processors under the technological sanctions almost impossible. We also looked at the Russia's ambitions to build its own 5G network using only domestic system and software. And we also understand that actually currently, so back then and also now it's the same, the country has none of needed equipment and also no expertise to produce its own 5G network. Russia relies on foreign vendors, which include Ericsson, Nokia, and also Huawei. And Russia's mobile operators have cooperated with these companies for several decades. So it means we see certain infrastructure in Russia, which depends on different foreign vendors, but there is no own domestic solution which could easily substitute the needed infrastructure, the needed equipment and expertise. We also looked at operating system, and here, this is also not very surprisingly, I think Russia's case, it's not a special one. It's more or less the same situation in other countries, that the dominant position for operating system on computers is occupied by US-based companies. So in computers, so Windows holds more than 53% of the markets, and is an absolute leader among private companies, state authorities, and also among people, among ordinary users. And the second one is Android, and on the third place it was iOS. So there is no Russian solutions also here. When it comes to mobile operating systems, here's the situation also not surprisingly different. So two US-based companies are the leaders here. This is Google and Apple with their operating system, Android and iOS. Here Russia has actually an alternative. So Russia developed its own mobile operating systems, Aurora. We looked at it and understood, so this is not really compatible with the most used smartphones in the country. This has a strong lobby among Russia's manufacturers who would like to have this mobile operating system introduced for state authorities and also for state-owned companies. But if we look at the conditions of the market, so Aurora rather was not successful in comparison to Google and Apple in Russia. And maybe very quickly on the general situation that also Stefan mentioned, that actually this so IT sector and human capital in Russia looked very promising, and we know many companies, like global players, which were founded by Russians, for example, Nginx, Luxoft, Parallels, Telegram. And we also observed that in the recent years, they relocated abroad, or these companies are being purchased by US or other Western companies. And we also looked at some statistics among young IT specialists and students who in their majority said that they would like to leave Russia because of their living standards, because of their more prospects abroad. And they indicated that they would like to move to the United States, or to United Kingdom and to Germany. So these three countries were among their priorities. I maybe stop here and give the floor to Philipp, and look forward to the discussion.
Maybe you take directly over, and then I might have a follow-up question, but better we do this complete with you too.
Yeah, thank you, Alena. Thank you, Stefan. Sorry, I'm a little bit sick, so I hope that I don't sound too bad. So I'll be talking about the sovereign internet, which is very closely tied actually to information control, and I'll explain why right now. So in Russia, there is basically this constant fight, or Putin is basically having this fight between the West and between its own society. Because for him, having like a free internet and having free information poses a huge threat, as we can especially see right now in the war in Ukraine, where he really tries to contain the information that gets spread. And even before the war, basically every protest was a major threat for him. And he also always claimed, we can probably say that this is more an excuse than actually real, but he also claimed that every protest is basically the West being involved and kind of like trying to destroy Russia from the inside. And this is why he said, or why there was this policy that was being developed of the sovereign internet. So we need to be sovereign, and we need to kind of contain everything that's happening within our borders, and we don't want interference from the outside. This is quite tough to implement because Russia's network is globally very, very well integrated. When it was created, there are countless nodes that go between Russia and foreign countries. So it's very, very hard to control this network, and very, very hard to do what Putin or what like the Russian authorities try to do. And this is where you basically need to understand that the Russian internet, when it was created, is vastly different from the Chinese one. The Chinese instantly understood the potential of the internet, and also the political climate was way different than it was in Russia in the late 1990s and 2000s, where Russia was kind of democratizing, or at least to some extent, and China was obviously already quite authoritarian, and obviously still is. And so that's why the Chinese internet, they directly understood, they built the firewall, they really like contained everything within their country. They created their own big services, social networks. So they don't really rely that much on foreign technology. And this is kind of like the big difference why Russia can't just very quickly do everything like what China did. But we basically argue in our text that Russia tries to implement what China did 20 years ago. Russia is kind of like on the path of doing the exact same thing. And so yeah, therefore Russia created and is creating multiple systems of control, and they have different layers. And so one of them is already well known to you, probably, is the blacklist. So you have a blacklist that blocks certain websites, and ISPs have to enforce them. So if you type in that URL, you just don't get redirected to that website. Then there are the SORM systems, the deep packet inspection systems. So these are like black boxes that scan your data packets, and they try to analyze what you're doing. And yeah, they also hand over the information to the FSB. So if you're a potential threat, the FSB probably knows. It depends on the protocol, obviously, but they try to find out what you're doing. And in addition to that, the other technical aspect is the domain name system. So where Russia basically tries to have a national domain name system that is disconnected from the global one. Even China doesn't have that. And it's going to be very interesting to see if it works. The other layer is where basically Russia tries to influence companies like the big ones like Yandex or Meru. So they try to infiltrate them with their own people that they know, and they try to kind of gain control over them, and also kind of force the people of the country to switch to Russian technologies or Russian software, for instance, switch to VK instead of Facebook, or switch to YouTube instead of YouTube. And so the findings, so what we basically found is that the DPI systems, so the blacklist in itself is already been quite effective. I'm obviously talking for the average user here. So if you're if you're a user with a lot of expertise, it's quite easy to circumvent all these blocks. But if you're not, for the average user that uses the internet in Russia, it's quite hard to circumvent. So the blacklist obviously was quite effective, just banning websites altogether. As we also see with the Ukraine crisis now, Russia has done this. I don't want to go into too much detail here. And also the deep packet inspection systems that basically slow down traffic have worked. So for instance, Twitter was slowed down actually without that much collateral damage. And that was quite impressive. Now, obviously, everything kind of changed. So what I'm telling you here is slightly outdated, but it kind of shows in what direction we weren't already quite sure in what direction Russia is going. And now with the war, obviously, everything changed quite dramatically, but in the exact same direction. They were the blockage of the Navalny app that was actually quite successful. So they successful for the Russian government. So they actually managed to block it quite well. There is control over algorithms and news aggregators. So where actually Russia, the state, or like Roskomnadzor is basically implementing laws where certain news outlets are not allowed to be published, and where they kind of with issuing white noise are able actually to manipulate algorithms so that the news that they want to be published always land up on the top. That's quite interesting. They're fining foreign companies like Facebook and Google, for instance. They basically just harass them constantly if they don't instantly remove website. So there have been a couple of fines, and in the last couple of years, these fines went higher and higher and higher. And they're, as I said before, trying to restructure companies. For instance, like Mail.ru or Yandex, by either buying them altogether. So Mail.ru now got bought by, basically, I mean, the company structure is really shady and really complicated. I don't want to go into too much detail, but basically Mail.ru got bought by Gazprom, which is state-owned. So Mail.ru now, it's actually now called VK from the social network Kontakte. The entire company is now called VK. And so they have the biggest Russian social network, the second biggest, Odnoklassniki, also like the biggest mail service, very big news aggregator. So a lot of influence is now in state hands here. And same goes with Yandex, basically, also very shady company structure where they had basically implemented a new board of trustees, and now the state is much more involved than it used to be. And just recently, for instance, the CEO of Yandex left. So it's going to be quite interesting in what direction the company now is going to pivot, but probably more authoritarian as well. So there are a few problems for the Russian state still, and even now after the war. So there are some things that they can't implement yet. For instance, when it comes to Google services, you all know that YouTube hasn't been blocked. And one of the potential reasons for this is if you start blocking Google services, you might also block content delivery systems, which are all connected to each other. This is very, very complicated to explain, but what basically could be the result that if you block YouTube or Google services, people won't, for instance, not be able to use their Android phones anymore, because they also communicate with Google update servers. And if all of them don't work anymore, then because so many people rely on Android phones, this is going to be a huge mess. So they were not able to block every single service and every single website because they still rely on them. And VPNs obviously remain a problem, but only for a relatively small portion of the population. But if VPNs still work, and VPNs are very, very hard to detect, and even for the DPI technology, most of them slip through. So if you have a VPN in Russia, you can still access most information. And then there are new protocols that came out, which are called DOH and DOT. Here again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but what they basically do is they mask a certain part of the DNS request that makes it impossible for systems like DPI to actually analyze what the user is doing. And these are really tough, and this is why, yes. Yeah, and this is why basically, their systems are in some way also have been proven ineffective. And so it's going to be interesting to see how Russia is actually able to implement these bans long-term and to 100%.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry for interrupting you, but I think you already, very good initial presentation, but we also have to look a little bit into the time also to take more questions. I really want to ask everybody when we are through to raise hands. Yeah, I really would like to bring in people to ask questions directly. And let's switch to Nikita and look also to the current situation. So since the beginning of the war, Russia has blocked several news media and social networks, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, for instance. How effective are these blockades, and how can Russians get independent information and stay connected to each other, to the world? So what alternatives do they have to get other information? Please, Nikita. Need to switch off my mic?
Yes.
Yes, it's
yes.
working.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Mm-hmm.
Yes, great. So unfortunately, we can't deny the fact that the Russian government has become more technologically savvy, and of course, the efficiency of the blockages of the measures aimed at restriction of access information online has drastically increased. And the previous speakers highlighted a number of different technical measures aimed at ensuring that the blockages are more or less efficient. Well, of course, I would like to mention that recently the government also introduced the so-called TSPU, the technical system of countering threats. It is possible to translate it like that. It's in Russian abbreviation. And this system is an integral technological platform or technological element for the so-called sovereign internet. So yes, as I have already said, the blockages are quite efficient. And when we're talking about their efficiency, I would like to draw your attention that for the Russian government, at least for the short term, at least for the current situation, it's quite palatable to restrict access for the widest social classes, social cohorts of the Russian population. For those who are not quite savvy about VPNs, proxies, and in fact who are not very active users of the internet or of the foreign platform and social media. So that's why I think that in the short term, the Russian government, well, unfortunately it has accomplished its goals. Nevertheless, it's regardless of the efficiency of the block list, DPIs and TSPUs, we are talking about the eternal competition of the swords and shields, and VPNs, proxies, Tor still play a vital role in circumvention of the majority actions of the government aimed to restrict access to information online. Well, the problem is that speaking about the Tor browser or the onion routing of the information traffic, it is not very popular in the Russian Federation. Unfortunately, the user base of such solution, well, it's quite small. It's about, we were talking about maybe thousands of users. So yes, so this is a problem. VPNs are quite popular, and our organization witnessed that the popularity and the total number of downloads of different VPNs, applications, browser plugins skyrocketed during the recent couple of months, and our organization also offers users to use our browser plugin sensor tracker that not only helps to circumvent the blockages, but it also indicates internet users when they access to the websites that were included into the list of the so-called information dissemination organizers. This public record of the information dissemination organizers contains the website owners, administrators that are liable to transmit and to retain information about the users, about their messages. Practically all the information, both personal information and technical information regarding their communication in the internet. But still, luckily for the Russian people, VPNs, Tor, well, of course, it depends on the particular application it serves, but it's still functional against blockages. But well, our oversight agency, Roskomnadzor, is quite aware of the existence of VPN services, and for the recent couple of years, it has already blocked something about 20 or maybe 30 VPN services here in the Russian Federation. I think that's all. To conclude, I could say that it's vital for the Russian civil society organization. It is vital for the Russian society as a whole, in order to get information, independent information, or maybe at least an alternative information. It is very important that the foreign VPN resources, foreign organization that the foreign organization that support different technical applications aimed at the conversion of the blockages. It's very important that they wouldn't change their mind one day and pull out from the Russian Federation, from the Russian market, because without them, well, Russia still has its own VPN services. Kaspersky has its own VPN solution, but Kaspersky company, it's a Russian company. This is a company incorporated in the Russian jurisdiction, and this company several years ago indicated its stance about the blockages, about the restriction of access, and it's a pro-governmental company, if it's possible to say so. So that's why, as I can't stress it enough, it's vital for our society that the foreign technological companies will not pull out from the Russian market, because without them, the opportunity, or even the ability to access independent or alternative information will be severely impeded.
Okay, thank you very much for this. Just a quick question. But is it only on the foreign companies to leave the Russian market? Is it not also a policy of the Russian state that they have to leave the Russian market? So how to stay on a market where the government does not allow you to stay in a way?
Yes, I agree with you, and this question would be pertinent if we were talking about such IT tycoons as Microsoft Corporation or Intel Corporation. These companies, practically they have no choice, because I think that they are currently between the devil and the deep blue sea, because at the same time they should comply with the sanctions, with the office of with the United States sanctions, and these are the American companies. Well, it's quite understandable for them, and at the same time, they should comply with the laws and regulations here, because they have business interests here. They have they have affiliates, they have partners here, etc., etc. But I am talking more about small companies, about VPN service providers, not like Cisco, for example, about small VPN providers, about small internet companies, because unfortunately, the whole escalation of the conflict caused a strife among the IT guys, strife in the IT community, and some companies have tried to expose the idea of, let's say, of disconnecting Russia from the global internet. Some companies denied the VPN services, for the Russian. So yes, I'm talking about a very specific group of companies, like Proton, for example, other famous VPN services, because unfortunately, as I have already said, small companies, medium companies, email providers, cloud services providers, some of them has already articulated the idea that they will suspend the provision of services for the Russians.
Okay, thank you very much. And also, if you remember the Navalny app, I think they were also taken out from the stores, yeah, of the US companies under pressure from the Russian state or from the Russian institutions. So they were acting according to the demands from the Russian state. I think which how to say it, yeah, which undermined also the campaign of Navalny. Yeah, I think that was very visible. Yeah, let's switch. Also looking into the time, let's switch also to Natalia. Two quick questions. Is Russia able to switch off internet in the country? And what role does the exodus of the Western companies from Russia mean for the people and the freedom of speech in Russia? Natalia, please.
Sure, thank you. I don't want to repeat what Alena, Philipp, and Nikita have already said. I think it's quite clear that Russia is very much dependent on Western technologies, on Western infrastructure, including global internet. And we have seen examples where Russia have tried to block certain websites and where everything stopped working, internet broke. And so we have a lot of evidence there that it will be quite challenging. However, we do have example of Iran, example, where even though their sort of alternative internet doesn't work very well, and nevertheless, it's what they have, and the government is exerting control over their internet there, and it's working even though it's not super functional. And so we can imagine the same happening in Russia, where it's not as maybe as efficient, but nevertheless, that's all Russian people will have. I hope we will not see that reality, but I think because of the recent events, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the companies leaving Russia, Russia being isolated. And so it's becoming sort of for the government easier, I think also politically, to shut down a lot of the services and to cut off the internet, because I think before a lot of individuals who were not even political, they didn't even care so much about Ukraine or politics or human rights. They just wanted to stream their YouTube videos and have their Instagram stories, you know, and so those platforms, for example, were very popular in Russia among the general population. So I think it was kind of politically risky for the government to cut them off. But now that Russia is being actually isolated and cut off by the West, you know, and due to sanctions and Western governments, companies' actions, I think it's becoming politically easier for the government to say, hey, it's the West, they are the ones to blame. And so what we are trying to do is just like create our alternative to help you stay connected. So that I think is becoming much more likely these days, unfortunately. And yes, the role of this exodus of Western government, of Western companies has been had a very bad effect, as was mentioned already by previous speakers. It's becoming very hard for individuals to access these independent platforms, to get independent news about what's going on, connect, organize, protest. So it's definitely affecting, making it harder to protest against the war, for people to speak out and share information. And from our organization, that what we're seeing working with partners, not just in Russia, but in Ukraine and all over the region, is that unfortunately, a lot of civil society organizations, human rights organizations who are fighting against the war, who are fighting for human rights of Ukrainians, of Russians, of Belarusians, they are being affected. Their work is being affected. The platforms are being cutting them off. Sometimes we're seeing explanations. Some say it's sanctions, some say it's export controls, which actually, from our experience and understanding, those are not preventing majority of the companies and the services that we're talking about, like which providing regular services to regular users. They are not affected by sanctions. So a lot of times there's either misunderstanding of the sanctions by the companies, or it's just an easy excuse for them to say because it's not profitable to work anymore in Russia, or morally they feel like they want to take a stand. And so, but what we are seeing is that some of these companies are even providing explanations saying, well, we're cutting you off because you support the war in Ukraine. And that's something that is completely not based on any evidence. We have, again, organizations, human rights organizations, side by side with Ukrainian civil society to expose what's happening and help to keep them protected. And so that's a very unfortunate situation that we're seeing, and we're trying to, change and hopefully educate companies and states as well in terms of what is actually, because what's happening is not very helpful, I think, to civil society in Russia, Belarus, or Ukraine, in fact.
Thank you very much. Maybe just one follow-up question. I think you're also working on the role of China, if I understand it right, in this technology sector. I think if I'm take it right, I think it's dependency on Western technology was not only about availability, but also not being too dependent on Chinese technology. Yeah, and I think I would maybe argue that it's mainly driven by the security people who are also not so sure about China in a way. So how would you see now the situation with the war and really this shift? I think there will be more and more sanctions coming in. This war, unfortunately, might not end soon. So how would you see the trend now? So will they have no other choice to go on Chinese solutions? Or maybe it's speculation, but what would you say? What is the next steps also with 5G? And so on. I think there might be no other solutions available than Chinese. What do you think? So what would be the trend here in with this regard, with the war, how the war will impact, yeah, on these issues?
Yeah, it's hard to say, but on the regular use level, we're already seeing, for example, with Apple and other Western companies, right, leaving, at least closing their stores in Russia. Regular users are no longer able to buy the secure devices that are coming right from Apple, Google. And so this is becoming a problem because obvious alternatives a lot of times coming from Chinese companies, they're not very secure. And so that leaves people very vulnerable to surveillance by the government in Russia. So that's a huge problem. In terms of on a larger scale, whether Russia will make a decision to switch to Chinese alternatives, we will see. But I think we are seeing that it's not so clear whether China is in fact on the side of Russia. I think they have kind of been ambivalent, and even some of the sanctions, or statements that they've made, they wasn't quite so clear, and they want to stay neutral, or sometimes even siding with the West. So I think that makes China a tricky partner. And when you're talking about substituting your sensitive infrastructure, especially that has to do with national security, that would be a huge risk for Russia to actually have Chinese government all over their information. So that's remains a risk, and we will see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you very much. So if the auditorium now comes in, please raise your hands. There are several questions in the chat. I'm happy to take really people in to ask questions directly. I always prefer this. It's a little bit more interactive, but I can also read out questions if people are too shy to ask personally questions. So maybe I start with the questions from the chat. So there's a longer question here from Thomas Köppen. We know it is technically challenging that the Russian government will be able to isolate Russia from the worldwide internet, but they try to control DNS and are able to block network ranges. As information is key and essential to give Russian people access to alternative information, are there activities in the West to invest into first, giving free access to satellite internet for Russian citizens, give free access to VPNs, as Russian people cannot pay VPN providers anymore without PayPal and MasterCard and so on. So I don't know if someone can say something, if there is a kind of a maybe more strategic approach also to think about this and to provide here also services, yeah, for Russians. I read out more questions and then maybe we do a round. I think on China I already asked and 5G. So then here we have a question from Ilda Daminov. Could you please talk a little bit about how Russia uses digital technology to repress the opposition in both broad and targeted fashions or ways? What are the main areas of focus here in repression or control, maybe also of the society? Thomas Molnar, how would you describe Russian authorities' level of trust when it comes to working with Chinese providers? I think I already a little bit asked this question, but maybe I add also, who are the main drivers also of this policy now? And so if we talk about security elites, will they now get even more upper hand? And how they see China also as a partner? I would maybe add this to this question. And here's another question from Ottmar Schuster. The exchange of information with the scientific university partners, is it dangerous for our partners in Russia? So maybe we can look into this field, yeah. So, but what does it mean now to have contacts also with European Western partners in the academic field? I think we had also a trend in the EU to stop any kind of academic cooperation with Russian universities. I'm very critical about this approach, and I think we are somehow a little bit adapting to it. But I still see here this trend. But how dangerous it is also. So who wants to start? Maybe Alena, we start with you, and then we just go through.
Yeah. I also see Valentin Weber wants to ask questions, so maybe we take it in and then just go through.
Okay, let's take one more question, and then I think we have enough. So Valentin, maybe you just come in.
Oh yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, and introduce yourself, please.
I'm Valentin Weber. I am a sorry. So now I should work the camera. Yeah, I'm a research fellow here at DGAP, and I've focused a bit more on censorship in China. And so there's also a lot of focus there to give people access to information abroad. But there, the problem is that people are not that much interested in getting information from abroad because they've at home already such an ecosystem of everything, right? That's happening. So here I'm curious about hearing from you. Whoever feels like maybe they have some input as to what informations are Russians trying to access abroad. Is it reaching relatives? Is it political information? Is it, so maybe if you have some insights as to what people are looking for. I think in Ukraine, the Ukrainians said like we're identifying Russian soldiers. So maybe that is something they're looking for. So maybe some input to that would be my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe I add one more question. Are there numbers, how many people left with the war from the IT sector, Russia? And what is the strategy of IT companies? Do they bring their stuff outside of the country and try to further work, or do they work inside of the country? So how these companies adapt to the new situation? So let's start, Alena. You don't need to answer every question. Yeah, I think there's a lot of
I would like to add something on China. So Natalia said very important things, but I also think it's also very important to keep in mind that Russia understands that China could be also targeted by the US sanctions, and Huawei has already experienced a hard hit from the US administration of Donald Trump. So they know how powerful the United States are in terms of technologies and also applying rules for producing tech abroad if it's based on US technologies. And in these terms for Russia, it doesn't make any sense to rely on China as one provider for everything. And if it comes to 5G and if it comes to Huawei, for Russia, it's a huge risk to rely only on one and only on Chinese companies. And I think they understand it now. So now it's a really huge challenge for them how to develop telecommunication networks on their own and without China. I don't see any driver within Russia who would push for Chinese technologies. I don't see anybody. So until now, it was the situation what it was rather for development its own IT sector. I have never heard anybody saying, let's switch to Chinese technologies. There is a rather reluctance towards Chinese technologies among the IT industry and also among Russia's government. IT companies, Stefan, you asked. Yeah, we heard the numbers that 70,000 IT specialists have already left Russia, and that's another 100,000 are going to leave Russia in the next time. There is an urgent need for more IT specialists. It has been already the case before the war, and now there are several initiatives from the government how to keep people in the country. So, including some benefits for taxes, and also some ideas to develop their own business in Russia and to be to be an exception for conscription for Russia's army. So some different things, but they're definitely not enough substantial package for Russia's IT sector, and a lot of uncertainty among the Russian IT community what will come next in Russia. Yeah, so maybe I stop here and give the floor to my colleagues.
Yeah, Philipp, you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer the first and the third question of the chat. So the first one regarding the satellite internet, I think that's a very interesting concept and has been used in Ukraine. It's still very expensive. And the question is, how much do we actually need it? Because since, we already said proxies and VPNs work quite well, it's like, this is probably what people in Russia should rely on, because till the satellite internet gets rolled out, I mean, even in countries like the UK, it's still a very, very minor thing. I mean, you can order it, but it's not widespread. And so that's the question regarding the access to VPNs. And it's a really, really good point. And I think everybody who is French in Russia, for instance, I purchased a few licenses, and if you have friends there, ask them, hey, can I purchase you a VPN license? Most of them for 2 years, they're like £10. They were like really not expensive, and you do them a huge favor. At the same time, they find kind of loopholes on how to pay for them. So for some of them, you can now pay via Bitcoin or other currencies, for instance, Chinese currencies. So they kind of find a way to do it. But yeah, for the average user, it's quite tough. So here, of course, if you want to support, it's obviously a good idea. And it would definitely be an incentive for governments to kind of help. How is it possible? How can Russians actually pay for it? I also heard that standard payment systems still kind of work again, but that's regarding the opposition question, I think this is a really interesting one. And in Russia right now, as it stands, if I want to create my opposition Telegram channel, or I want to organize something, I can. This is not blocked, and it's very hard for authorities to specifically target like single chats or posts or groups, and like even Facebook and all of this. Even though it's now blocked with a VPN, you can still use it. What Russia doesn't want is like the bigger picture. So news, for instance, Russia doesn't want the average user to get like news, like opposition news. So this is why, they're focusing on rolling out their propaganda as much as they can. And when it comes to when you organize and you get too big, then what they do is they target the people. So for instance, Navalny is a very famous case. They basically target the specific person and lock him up for whatever stupid charge they can put on him. So it's kind of like selective law enforcement. So you're fine in general, but then some people just get targeted, and you're never sure if you're not the next victim or not. But in theory, there is no direct blockage of private channels. So yeah, the focus is on propaganda. So we want to get out our news. And as soon as you organize protests, as soon as you're on the streets, then we're here to get you. So that's kind of like the strategy.
Okay, thank you. Nikita?
Yes, I will try to answer the majority of the questions rather briefly. So talking about China, well, China is in a very difficult position, because even China relies heavily on the Western technologies, and they're talking about the semiconductors. Recently, the Chinese regulators admitted that they have lost the semiconductor race, the technological process race. Secondly, as far as I heard, Chinese government tried to acquire ASML, the Netherlands company, the ASML wafers, for producing semiconductors with the most technologically fine process. So yes, the Chinese government, China is not a reliable partner, because it has its own national interests, national security concerns. So yes, talking about the satellite internet, unfortunately, satellite internet is not an option here. Firstly, because satellite internet is a licensed type of activity here. The supply, any supplies of the satellite internet equipment will be subject to customs control, licensing control, etc. And secondly, the only official tie with such as satellite internet provider as OneWeb has been recently suspended by the state corporation Roskomsvoboda. The head of this corporation announced that they ceased to launch OneWeb satellites. So I think that this is another factor why VPN and landline internet connection should be regarded as an option. Also, talking about the relocation and talking about the hemorrhage of IT specialists from the country, I heard that Microsoft has already relocated a great number of IT specialists to Serbia. So there were rumors, at least, that large IT companies they relocate at their own expense key staff to such safe havens as Serbia, maybe as Georgia or Armenia, and other neighboring countries. Talking about returning back to VPN and about free access of the Russians to VPN services. In fact, our organization cooperates with a number of VPN service providers, and we are trying to, let's say, to negotiate a possibility of free access to VPN services, at least on a limited functionality basis. And regarding maybe the most pertinent question, and well, maybe the most crucial one, it's about the oppressing social activists, about the oppression of civil society organizations. Yes, Philipp highlighted a very important issue of the so-called selective law enforcement, of the ludicrous charges, and of course, I would like to add that there were recent developments and amendments to the legislation that only enlarge the scope of legal or the scope of ludicrous legal basis in the context of freedom of speech. That in fact endanger your freedom. But unfortunately, in the Russian Federation, we have another rather ominous trend, and this trend is aimed at the development of facial recognition and the use of artificial intelligence in the facial recognition. We had a case of our activist Anna Kuznetsova, who managed to buy her own images that were taken from the public surveillance system. And there were about 70 images, photographs with the dates, with the locations. So, well, it's a very ominous trend. And at the same time, the government, the courts, the law enforcement bodies, they do not disdain in the administrative or criminal prosecution to resort to such facial recognition results or artificial intelligence results, disregarding their reliability, disregarding their accuracy, and disregarding, of course, the protection of personal data, the right to privacy, etc. And unfortunately, it's not exclusively about crimes in general. We have already witnessed a number of cases when these technologies is in Moscow City, they were explicitly and exclusively used against demonstrators, against people who were opposing publicly the war, against social activists, against their families, so even against the member of local parliament. I mean, of the Moscow parliament. So I think that I have managed to answer all the questions, probably. Yes. Well, that's all.
Yeah, okay. Maybe there's still something left over for Natalia. There was also a question about academic exchange. I think nobody has answered to it. Maybe you have some thoughts on it.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on academic exchange, but we do have seen some universities being added to foreign agent or undesirable organizations, you know, the list that Russian government makes for everyone who doesn't agree with the Russian government. So there is definitely a risk there as to how high it's up to, I think, depending on the individuals and the university and the subjects that they are talking about, but it's definitely a risk I would encourage to keep in mind, because any kind of a Western association these days, and especially if there is some implication for national interest, and these days it could be anything, again, anything you say that the government doesn't like could be a threat to national interest. So I would just encourage to be cautious about that. But I want to add again to what has already been said in terms of the tools of repression and the tools that would help Russian people and civil society. I think they are interconnected. I think right now, as we have mentioned, there is this drive to disconnect and leave Russia, cut off Russia. But I think one technologies and companies we think that should be cut off from Russia is the companies that are providing this repressive technologies, which Nikita mentioned, facial recognition technologies. We have extensive surveillance, SORM system, a sovereign internet system, filtering, censorship technologies. So this is something that I think all this energy that we currently have, anger towards what Russia is doing, and we want to encourage companies to take a stance. And I think this is a place where we could direct this energy and say, hey, you have to stop providing the technologies of repression to the Russian government, which they're using to suppress anti-war movement and suppress information that's coming out of Ukraine. So this is the one thing that I think we can all, unite and do something about it. And in terms of the tools that are, would help, I think we do see some efforts by some companies, but mostly they have sort of this nonprofit angle, like Tor, for example, Tor network, or Siphon, for example. We see some individual initiatives to help, reinforce the infrastructure, provide circumvention tools. But we do need more from private companies and also from states to invest into this area to make the tools user-friendly, affordable, and safe and secure. Because we also have to remember there's a lot of VPNs, but a bunch of them are actually very bad for privacy and security. So we also have to make sure that we're not putting people at risk when we are recommending them some tools or making it free, because right now it's a very serious situation where we're having people facing up to 15 years, if not more, in jail for saying certain things. So we need to be extra careful about keeping people secure and their data secure as well. So those are the main things I wanted to say.
Okay, I don't see any questions at the moment. Maybe we have a final. Okay, there is another question. So maybe I take this question rather than I ask. What about the external perspective? Russia has used repeatedly cyber attacks against Western countries and also spreading misinformation and propaganda. So I don't see the question here. Maybe the person can ask the question directly. Maybe you ask your question directly without writing it. I think that would be nice. Because I don't get the question. Okay, we have the external perspective. Yeah, we know about it, but what is your question?
Yes, sorry for my type is here. I'm using a new keyboard. My question was basically, is it likely that this, what we have seen in the past, can we really see that is repeating in the future, or does it increase in the future, to put it differently?
Okay, Who wants to answer? Increase or repeat?
I think this is a bit another angle that we're really now focusing on. It's great to have Valentin Weber here among us, and maybe he could take if our speakers are not comfortable with the question. I don't know. I mean, Nikita, Philipp, Natalia, feel free. But I have no research on the dynamics, on the scope. I have no data.
So nobody wants to react? Okay, Valentin, I don't know. Yeah, Valentin, maybe just a quick reaction.
Just shortly, external perspective, we have just seen some spillover of cyber attacks. So I think Viasat, one of the satellite communication systems, was supposedly attacked during the invasion of Ukraine, and that targeted in part, that then affected systems in Germany as well. So some wind turbines went down and were disrupted for a couple of hours. But otherwise, we haven't seen any active attacks from Russia on any NATO members, for instance.
Yeah, I also wouldn't say about the NATO or West as much, but I think in Ukraine that remains to be a big challenge. Russia continuing cyber attacks, and there is some information about possible intentional disruption of the internet, not only like in cyberspace, but also physically destroying infrastructure. And there are some reports which we're still trying to confirm that they might be in fact associated internet, infrastructure, mobile communication being cut off, and then atrocities such as we have seen in Bucha happening, because obviously in such situations people cannot contact their loved ones or tell posts about what's going on. They are cut off from the outside world, and therefore the atrocities stay in the dark. And so this is something we have seen in other aspects. Internet shutdowns are associated with higher violence. We've seen that in Syria and others. So this is something that I know it's not directly related, but I just wanted to mention that this is like outside of Russia. Obviously, this is something that's happening in Ukraine that's quite disturbing, and I would encourage monitor. We have our Keep It On coalition that is monitoring internet shutdowns, but I think we should encourage overall to keep an eye on this, with this association between digital rights violations, cutting off internet cyber attacks, and severe atrocities and war crimes committed in Ukraine.
I think that's also an important point, and also to understand that this kind of cyber war is part also of the conventional war, yeah. So and that I think that goes on in parallel, and it's part of it, yeah. It's part of the strategy also, yeah. But I think it needs more research to clarify if this is a trend which is growing, or is it just focused on events, on specific events, when you also have the cyber attacks and the campaigns. Looking to the time, I have to finish, unfortunately, the event. I think it's really a very important discussion, and I think we also saw the different angles. Yeah, I think there you can open another window and to come into other parts of this topic, I think, which is also very, very, very important. I want to thank the speakers for the presentations and for the discussion, also for the questions. I think very important also here to engage. Alena just published a short comment on what does now the war mean with the sovereign internet and the situation in Russia in this sector, and we will do more, yeah, also in this field. Again, thank you very much for the presentation and for this really insightful discussion, and have a nice day. And again, thanks also to the Foreign Office for their kind financial support also of this report. Okay, thank you.